The light that learns. I don't sleep when the refrigerator hum fattens. It is a small noise that most people forgive, the breath of a machine that will not allow itself to rest. But since early spring it has grown a second note, a burr like insects inside a lampshade. When it starts up at night, the walls lift the sound and carry it along the studs until my narrow kitchen seems to vibrate with it. I tell myself it's nothing. Heat wave, tired bearings, a compressor doing its best with intolerances, but those words lie badly in the head when you are awake and the daylight will not end. I live on the 5th floor of a block called Thornbridge, a name the management brochures like more than we do. I am a climatologist by training, a technician by practice, which means I am the person who checks the small stubborn machines that see the sky and tell us what we cannot look at for long. Our station used to be an airstrip, and now it is a field of white domes and lattice masts at the edge of Greyline, where the wind usually rolls clean from the lake. This year, the wind has come heavy and hot like air out of a dry event, and the lake doesn't look like a lake anymore. It looks like the surface of a coin, burnished by fingers. I start the kettle most mornings, even though I no longer drink tea. The tap gives its thin, metallic cough and runs warm, then hot. Jose water from when I was a child and put my mouth to a hot green coil that had been lying in the sun on the lawn. This is what our surface-sourced municipal supply tastes like now. The pamphlet explains it all. Draw from Helion Lake, treat, distribute, conserve. I used to throw the pamphlet away. I keep them now, folded in a drawer with the old tax receipts and appliance warranties. The paper is hard and coated and does not absorb sweat. Shift change is at 6 at the observatory. Everyone calls it the solar farm. The domes carry instruments with names that sound like the parts of insects. Pyranometer, photometer, spectrograph. We coax the internals with cotton swabs and tweezers when dust gets in. We write dry notes in a common file. Calibration drift within uncertainty band. We are not allowed to write that we are tired or that the light has begun to feel like attention. The code of our work asks for caution, and caution has kept me employed and sane. Still, there is a difference between humility and denial. The sun hadn't set in 67 days when I began boiling water just to have it boiling. The light did not blaze, it persisted. You learned its moods as you learn a person's, the sours and the patience. It hardened paint and pulled a smell out of asphalt that followed you into your clothes. Towels never quite dried on the rack. At night the birds flew to the west edge of town, hovered, forgot, landed, and then stood. People wore welding goggles as a joke for 3 days, and then stopped joking. The window blinds in our building lived at half closed, as if ashamed to cover the view. No one called it the never-setting sun. We called it the tilt, because a deformation of time felt like the least untruthful phrase. The city sent advisories signed by new names each week. Stay indoors between noon and 6, place wet cloths over window boxes, limit screens to conserve grid stability. The market where I bought milk taped Limit 2 at the water aisle. The barcode scanner issued its hollow beep and sometimes a flat buzz, and the clerk, a thin boy with a bandana wet around his neck, packaged my bottles as if they were fragile. Receipts curled warm into my palm and then curled in my dish by the door until the ink went brown. If the sun were a person, we would have learned its address. I don't think in those terms. What I began to think, provisionally and only to myself, was that something in the light had learned to lean. We started seeing anomalies in shortwave reflectance at the surface, mealy words. I will say this plain. On days when the town despaired, the measurements rose, when the cooling center at Miller Gym turned people away, and a man left his hand on the tinted glass until his fingerprint fog had evaporated, when a grocer stacked ice in buckets by the door and the buckets were empty by 11, when the horticulture farm plowed under its summer seedlings because the leaves crisped in the ground, The spectrograph recorded fractional changes. Individually, they were noise. Accumulated, they were bias. The bias wrote itself into days, like handwriting. I checked. I ran blanks. I switched instruments. I wrote tentative, where an unbruised version of me would have written surprising. At home, I folded my towel to a neat square and aligned it with the counter S corner, as if the right angle could brace me. I put my mug, the grey one with a notch on the rim from a spring drop, back in its ring on the second shelf. It looked like an answer I could live with. We are not saints of routine. We are its children. The towel, the mug, the receipts, the hum. When night is gone, these objects begin to have opinions. The refrigerator hummed until I felt it allow me a little of its endurance. A neighbor taped the cooling center schedule beside the stairwell with blue tape that peeled in the corners. She highlighted noon to 6 in yellow highlighter, hours that meant nothing to anyone working a day. On the 68th day, I was sent to clean the window of Spectro 3, which had grown a fine film. Inside the dome, the air smelled like old packaging, that plasticky promise of new things. I lifted the cover, worked the lens with a cloth until my breath fogged the glass. The cooling center 2 blocks down had filled to capacity. People stood outside, pressing their forearms to the glass. The grid was taking frequency excursions, more demand than supply. So the lights in our lab had been dimmed to the edge, where fluorescents buzzed continuously, a tired wasp sound. We spoke softly as if our voices would draw power. When my screen showed another fractional rise and did not fall, I made myself right, persistent. At night, I turned on the hand-crank radio, the one with the band where the sky speaks as snaps and swallows. After a run of nothing came a voice boiled down to consonants. Advisory, outdoor work, limit contact, cooling transport, civil shelter. The voice had the tone of someone reading a grocery list for someone else's household. I turned it off. The silence had weight. The hum came back like a small iron-on fabric. The town learned the tilt. People put foil on their windows, not because it helped, but because effort is proof you deserve help. Children wore wet bandanas tied like old photographs of work crews. On sidewalks, chalk lines were drawn to show shade at different hours, and the chalk melted to paste. We booked water on corkboards, half-hour slots noted with initials. On Helion Avenue, traffic lights held yellow, as if asking a question too difficult to phrase. The dog at 19B learned to sleep under the sink. The food in my refrigerator warmed from the front inward, and I stood with the door open counting to 30 so the compressor would click and mark time. I went to the station at hours that had once been dark. The domes glowed as if lit from within. Moths battered themselves against my headlights and fell slow. In the lab, a failing tube pulsed, and I didn't turn it off. I could forgive a light for trying to remain itself. The server tower's small orange LED blinked in a pattern no manual recognized. In the new plot, the bias thickened, and when I dropped temperature and raised crowd density at the cooling center, the fit improved to the point of indecency. This is what heat waves do, I told myself. People gather, breath rises, air shares. Then I rebuilt the model with different proxies. Window touch duration from surveillance footage, time-stamped pharmacy cues, and the line nodded. It was a polite assent that made me feel unwell. "If you tell me the sun can hear us," Halema said, setting down a mug and the towel she carries like a sash, "I'll take your key card." not unkindly. We stood with our palms on the steel bench. The bench steadied us. She asked me how my body was doing, and I did the inventory. Sleep in increments. Appetite turned into arithmetic, jaw ache from clenching. She nodded as if she were reviewing a maintenance log. "We'll treat it as signal until it isn't," she said, "and we won't name it." I had not measured despair before. We pretend to. We assign numbers to what fits in the counting boxes. I became the person who typed "incident tear count" into a column and hated myself while the predictive power increased. On the day a woman named Vale took her 3 a.m. walk because 6 a.m. had burned her into headaches, the ground under her, in the park, softened. "Ground failure event," the county called it. She did not fall. She simply kept going down at the same rate she had been walking forward, as if the world had left a door ajar and she had stepped into it. There was no blood. There were her keys on the grass, house key, mailbox key, a small star. A boy put his hand to help and withdrew it clean, then did not put it back. After that, the bias did not slacken. In the lab, I pressed my finger to the screen, as if my body would remind the plot that human touch mattered. I drank from the tap and avoided it the next hour, and then drank again, as if the water were a person I could negotiate with. The towel on my rack stayed damp and brushed the cabinet when the fan rotated. I told it out loud that towels should commit. It remained itself. Halema circulated a memo: avoid metaphors, avoid passive voice, avoid fatigue. We all signed it like a promise we had already broken. I'm ashamed to say I spoke to the light. It wasn't an argument. It wasn't prayer. It was the sound I make when a machine refuses to start and I ask it to be reasonable. I went to Dome 4, pressed my forehead to the housing that accumulates heat and felt a vibration distinct from the racks. Rhythm without comfort. When I moved my head away, the rhythm moved into my hands, not the machine, the thing the machine had been paying attention to. 3 more sank the next day, shoes at a curb, handprints on a bench. The county sent a notice recommending weight distribution, as if our bodies were gear that needed repacking. Someone drew hopscotch across the place in the park. Children stepped carefully around the soft patches. We stopped joking that summer had eaten spring and began saying quietly that the light had learned us. Intentionality is a word too big for a mouth when you have slept 2 hours. I put it in the draft anyway, and then went to the lake when advisories told us to stay inside. The rail burned my palms and left their pattern on the metal. Across the water, the plant stack flickered in heat. The air tasted like a coin. On the radio band, there was crackle, a station nearly but not quite found. I whispered because it was ridiculous, and only ridiculous things require whisper. "We know what you redoing." The water answered by pretending to have a breeze. I did not intend to tell anyone. I woke at my table, my cheek stuck to a receipt, the word prisoner behind my teeth. At the station, at an hour that would once have been dawn, I found Halema flattening a towel with her palms so it would dry evenly. She said not to publish. We can show persistence without showing teeth. We pulled data from other stations in the chain. The line drew itself with the same civility. There is dignity in evidence. There is also dread when it persists. Provisional conclusion, I said. Provisional is my life raft. We're being noticed. Outside, a siren unwound itself and then was cut off before it could rise again. In that silence, the refrigerator hummed, and the hum had the patience of a thing that believes time is its ally. I went to the market. The barcode beeps sounded like words cut off mid-syllable. The clerk wrapped bottles and told me to save the caps because the drop-off paid more if you returned them. My receipt came warm. In the parking lot, a pair of shoes stood by an oil stain, not an event, just a second in which no one reached down. At home, I ran the tap and filled my mug and drank because I wanted to be a person who still drank water from a sink. It tasted of hose. I set the mug back into its ring carefully. I folded the towel. I lay on the floor so the fan's breeze would move across me, not over me. From the floor, you can hear a different house. Pipe knock, duck sigh, fatigue in metal. Somewhere a compressor clicked and failed to take the baton. My bones began to hum for it, little motors trying on a pitch. Perhaps we were heat-mad, sleep-stricken, and I was mapping meaning onto noise, perhaps. But there is a difference between fantasy and the weight of a hand holding a door. The light had learned the sentence where we said we were tired and said back, in a spectrum our instruments liked, "I can use that." The next time I went to the lake, I did not go alone. People stood at the rail with their palms, then lifted their hands to look at their prints, skin reddened. No one spoke. Somewhere behind us a child fussed softly and then stopped. I cupped my hands around my mouth to feel the shape of the words and said into the blaze that held all other blazes inside it, "We are your prisoners." It's embarrassing to put that here. The sentence left my mouth and met resistance a foot from my face, as if the air had thickened to save it. I felt no miracle. I felt change exactly where I stood. The light put itself around my shoulders. Not weight, not skin, only a change in the truth of the air. For perhaps 10 heartbeats, glare lowered, people took a breath together. The cooling plant on the far shore ticked as its steel changed temperature, small sounds like applause made by someone trying not to be seen. Then the light resumed. The plot in the lab rose another fraction and did not come down. Being noticed had been metabolized. I wrote tentative and meant we are being used. Sleep left as if it had remembered an appointment elsewhere. Appetite turned into arithmetic. Half an apple, 3 almonds, a glass that I refilled and did not drink. I stopped answering my brother S messages because I could not bear his stories of a different city with the same sky. I became a man who watched a towel with the devotion of a lover. When it held a fold, I believed we might live. When it slid, I loathed myself for wanting to read anything at all. We gave things away to the light to simplify our days. The parks department cut the swing ropes because the seats burned thighs and emptiness does harm. The last theater taped paper to its door. "See you in the cool months," the sign said, and people made the sound we make when we pretend to find something funny. Downtown, benches were scheduled. A man came at 11 each day and took a seat as if catching a tide. He left at 11:30 because he would not take more than his share of shade. A fire hydrant wore a municipal harness like a muzzle. To open it would be to steal. We ran our models to their edges and found that the edges had moved outward. We introduced ridiculous proxies because the thing itself would not be quantified. Crowd density, window touch, time to faint in line. Each proxy improved the fit and made me dislike the person I was at the keyboard. I set the variables on my screen and thought of a cat learning the sound of a can opener. If you do something enough, something else learns to expect it. We had been despairing together for weeks. The light had become fluent. The sinks ran warm even when set to cold. The pipes knocked like a stranger at a door. I wet a cloth and draped it on my neck, and it warmed so quickly that it did not feel like a lie, only a habit. In the mirror, my mouth had become a line I remembered from my mother S. summers when money thinned. I am a middle-aged man, alone, with no plants, because plants only teach you how to hurt correctly. I have instruments that treat attention as a beam that can be measured, and I have a refrigerator that has become the metronome of days. When the compressor clicked, I could keep time. When it failed, my heart missed its cue. Rolling outage schedules arrived. We taped them to our fridges with fruit-shaped magnets. Our building's slot always seemed to happen when food decides to change its mind. We were told to limit travel, but check on neighbors. We were told to carry wet cloths and conserve water. We were told to be kind. All of these boiled into one instruction: be quiet about what you need. At noon, the elevator was a box. We took the stairwell that smelled like plaster and rope. On landings, people rested and pretended it was to look out a small window. My body turned into numbers on a notepad. Hours slept, milliliters consumed. Minutes the hum failed to arrive. A neighbor asked if I wanted to share ice, and I said, "I'm fine," which is the sentence you say when all the water is behind your eyes. She nodded. She had a list of her father's medication tape laminated to her door. Times shifted, crossed out, rewritten. She had the exact print of the towel SS weave on her forearm from using it as a carrier. You might want an explosive breaking. We did not get one. We got the slow, steady failure of things meant to be small. Receipts faded to brown, then curled. The traffic light at Helion held yellow for a beat that became 2. The cooling center door became a palimpsest of palms, layers of salts and oils. Children learned not to run because running raised heat. The cashier's beep sounded like speech without breath. In this slow accumulation, something decided it had been invited. We sent a brief to the internal board. We used the most careful language we had left. Persistent association between spectral irregularities and indicators of human distress. We did not write hunger. Hunger is our word, but inside me I could not refuse it. The sun is a condition. It is a fusion furnace. It is also what we wake under. If it leans, every angle changes. If it finds a use for our despair, it will use it the way ivy uses brick. The wall remains, and then it does not. I slept 5 hours one afternoon and woke in panic because my body thought I'd missed a train. In the stairwell, the smell of wet gypsum was almost a mercy. On the landing, a woman from 3B sat with her head back. She opened her eyes and smiled the way people smile when they are unsure if the other person will stay. We sat. She told me the fridge had died in the night. She laughed at that and said, "Isn't that the line?" She had a mug with a chip and turned the chip to her lip because that is the side you trust. Power left for an entire night. The hum died. The silence didn't feel like rest. It felt like a held breath you cannot afford. I lay on the floor and felt the bones in my forearms hum of their own accord, as if they had learned to do the job. In the morning, the tap coughed and then ran the same warm. I drank. It tasted stubbornly of hose. Ash floated from nowhere and smeared like pencil when touched. I went to the lake again, because the rail was the only scale I trusted. People stood already, hands spaced at respectful distances. I did not speak. Someone said very quietly, "Do we wait?" No one answered. Across the water, the plant stacked noise into the afternoon. Compressor clicks too far to be heard, but not too far to imagine. A gull hung in air and did not decide. There is a thing that happens when you look for a signal and find it everywhere. Everything becomes signal. The sun set once, for half a minute by the engineers' clocks. The light softened, not in color, but in certainty. The town took a breath together, and then nobody spoke about it because it returned harder, as if embarrassed to have yielded. 4 people sank that day. Shoes by a curb, a pair of eyeglasses set neatly on a stoop, a line interrupted in chalk. The brief bias rose and ironed itself. I wrote persistent because I could not write what I believed. The scientist in me wanted to run, to leave the instrument and the towel and the dish of receipts and go inland to a place where day still ended. But the grid had instituted travel restrictions to conserve fuel. The buses ran odd hours. Our town became itself, polite, patient, wrong. We took the schedules and made them into tide tables. We pressed our palms to glass only for as long as glass could cool us. We did not say please to a star. On the last day that I still thought of as last, I packed a small bag for the station. A notebook, a pencil, a towel folded square, my grey mug. I walked past the market and listened to the barcode beeps. Thin, breathless, then a buzz. I did not buy water. In the park, Hopscotch squares remained, and no one hopped. At the lake, I stood and said nothing, and the light did what light does. It made everything visible and nothing understandable. I cupped my hands and did not speak. I waited until my palms hurt. When I lowered them, the prints remained pink, then went white, then became skin again. In the lab, Halema had written "Summer Persistence" across a whiteboard and underlined it twice. She said, as if we were studying for an exam in a class no one had wanted to take, that we would record without metaphor. I put my mug down in its ring on the bench. I aligned the towel with the edge of the steel. I wrote the sentence, "We are your prisoners," in my notebook and stared at it until the words lost their shape. I crossed it out and wrote, "We are here." It felt less theatrical and more accurate. It felt like the sentence the town had been saying by standing at the rail and by setting shoes side by side when they had no feet in them. I don't know if there will be a cool month. I know the light has learned the way we make despair and that it can turn that into something it wants. Wanting is a human verb that fractures at star scale, but I cannot find another. Perhaps it is not hunger. Perhaps it is a habit acquired in the presence of steady manufacture. We have been careful producers of fear and grief lately. The machine on the other side of the atmosphere would be a poor learner if it did not begin to place weight where the weight yields. The refrigerator no longer hums. My bones do. The towel never dries. The mug sits in its ring and the ring remembers it. The receipts lie flat now. The ink has paled to a color that no longer belongs to a language. The traffic light on Helion holds yellow a little too long, and then it lets go. On the radio band, I hear only the sound a mouth makes before speaking. I will go back to the station when the grid allows and sit with Halema, and we will write another version of the same careful paragraph. And the words we choose will make no dent in the air beyond our mouths. I will hold the door for my neighbor, and we will share a look that says we are not owed by the world, and still we will ask it softly. I will drink water that tastes like hose, and decide that survival has that flavor now. If the light leans harder when we name the leaning, then I will not name it. If the light leans anyway, I will be as quiet as a towel cooling on a rack. And if I go to the lake again, I will not say prisoner, I will not say please. I will place my hands on the rail until heat writes itself into me, and I will read it back, and I will be read in turn. Someone a few feet away will lift their mug to their lip and remember that the chipped side is safe. Someone behind us will count the seconds between compressor clicks in the plant as if counting would make a rhythm survivable. The light will keep us. The light will keep keeping us. I tell myself that keeping has more than one meaning, and I hold both until I cannot. Then I set them side by side like shoes at a curb and step away.